all of it.
I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order.
That too.
If, Ms. Goodell, if you would call the roll.
Let's see, Ms. Gill,
Aye.
Mr. Lawrence,
Here.
Ms. Ward,
Yes.
and Mr. Webb.
Here.
Thank you.
Go join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Important part of tonight's work session, we're going to be going over and hearing about our special ed audit that we did earlier this year. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Noonan for introductions and move to the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the board, friends from the community. We welcome you this evening. Tonight, we have a chance to hear from Dr. Joanne Cox following her opportunity to do a survey of our family, our staff, and our community regarding the special ed services that are provided here in the City of Falls Church. All of you have had a chance to at least review the report that was included in your board materials from last Tuesday evening, and also the PowerPoint presentation that she's going to share tonight. Our hope this evening is that you will have a chance to hear from Dr. Cox in detail and in depth regarding what she was looking at, her methodology, and from that, some recommendations that she has with respect to services here in the City of Falls Church. I believe and it's interesting just sort of to dovetail a couple of ideas together that we're going to be talking about, is as we engage in revamping our triennial plan, Dr. Cox's work couldn't come at a better time because it gives us an opportunity to look at some of those areas for which we can utilize and leverage the recommendations that are being made into our future planning as we move ahead. Later this evening, we'll be talking a little bit about the triennial plan, and I would anticipate that over the next several months, we will incorporate a number of those recommendations that she's going to share with us tonight into that triennial plan. As she begins her presentation tonight, I have her bio in front of me, and rather than read it to you, I hope that Dr. Cox, you have a chance to share with the board your robust background, and we welcome you tonight and look forward to your presentation. So, Mr. Chair, with your approval, we'll turn it over to Dr. Cox.
Welcome, Dr. Cox, and we look forward to hearing your presentation and recommendations that you have tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent Noonan and Board Chair and board members for this opportunity to return to Falls Church. I have to tell you, it was 10 degrees hotter in Florida when I left, so I welcome the opportunity to come back.
This is cool. Sorry.
And chill a little bit, but I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. I know you have other business on the agenda, but I wanted to make time at the end for you to ask questions, or if you would prefer to informally stop and ask questions as we go along. What is your normal protocol?
Do you have a preference, Dr. Cox?
No, I can go. I'm pretty flexible.
Chair, would you prefer to ask questions along the way or wait till the end?
If there are pressing questions that you don't forget, you can do that, but if we can try to hold them or write them down so that you can have them for that purpose, so we can get through the presentation. But definitely with pressing questions, please go ahead and ask. Yeah.
A little bit about myself. My firm is located in Tallahassee, Florida. I've been from classroom teacher to central office administration. I worked for the Florida Department of Education for many years, and I put all of that levels of experience into my briefcase, and I've been doing this type of consulting in 35 different states, and I think my last count was about 150 school districts across the nation. I'm no stranger to Virginia. I've done many, many studies in Virginia, close to over 20 school district reviews in Virginia, including for your state superintendent, Stephen Staples, when he was superintendent in York County. We also do other types of services, general ed reviews, operational reviews, currently working with the Hopi Indians in Arizona, which is quite an interesting project. So I love what I do, and I'm very passionate, so I will try to keep within the time limits for this presentation. The purpose of the study, as you all know, is to look at the operations and programs and commend the district for best practices and also suggest some recommendations for improvement. A variety of methodology was used for this study, including we surveyed staff and parents, and then we compared how the staff responded to parent survey responses. We did an interview and focus groups of over 75 stakeholders, including staff and parents. We either did that individually or in focus groups. I visited classrooms, at least 35 classes across all 5 schools, so I got a good flavor of instruction. We had a parent open forum. Total of 28 persons signed in at the parent forum. It was held at Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School. I think more people attended, but not all of them signed in. I looked at over 70 documents, both at the state level and district level data, and then I did a peer comparison district with, and these peers were based, and we'll go through some of the comparisons, mainly based on student population, similar student population. So I tried to not make any recommendations on any one of these methodologies. I tried to triangulate, so I wouldn't make a recommendation simply based on a survey. I wouldn't make a recommendation simply on what I saw in one classroom. I used a triangulation of all of these methodologies to make my recommendations. So the online surveys were open for approximately 2 weeks. It's interesting to note that there were a high number of neutral responses in this survey. Not uncommon, but it could either indicate there were no strong feelings towards the various questions or insufficient knowledge, or it could be that the question was worded in which they didn't have an answer. But there was a very high percentage of neutral responses in the survey. I'm just going to briefly go over some of the highlights of the survey. There's a lot more in the full report, but while 41% of the staff gave positive responses regarding the school board's fairness in dealing with special ed issues, the majority was neutral, 57%. Only 31% of the staff responded positively that the district special ed advisory committee provides useful suggestions and guidance, while the majority of the responses were neutral. And although 45% responded positively that the school district staff provides support needed to be effective in the classroom, 37% were neutral and 18% were negative. And by negative, I just mean that they either strongly disagreed or disagreed. More staff survey results. 32% of the staff responded positively that general and special ed teachers have adequate planning time together, while 28% were neutral and 38% were negative. And some of the recommendations will follow some of these responses, particularly on staff planning. Regarding whether the division provides teachers and staff with quality professional development opportunities on the needs of children with disabilities, 42% were positive, while the 33% were neutral and 26% were negative. When questioned whether they have been asked about or surveyed about how well special ed services meet the needs of students, 31% responded positively, 25% neutral, and 44% either disagreed or strongly disagreed. While 37% of the staff responded positively that the division has a best practices database or resources to access to help them improve instruction, 38% were neutral and 25% either strongly agreed or disagreed. So we're going to move to the parent survey results, and I asked the same questions of the staff that I did of the parents purposely to see how the two groups would compare. And parents, it's interesting to note that parents rated their overall satisfaction with special ed in this district at 74% positive, while the staff rated parent overall satisfaction as 62%. That's an interesting result, that the parents rated their overall satisfaction higher than what the staff rated parents' overall satisfaction. Parents responded positively 64% of the time that they have adequate access to training, resources, and assistance, while staff responded positively only 34%. Most of the staff were neutral on this question. Sure. You
Sorry,
have a
just on that question, was the staff asked what they thought parents thought on that one as well, or did staff have enough access to resources? Because you've got some questions where you're asking, how do you feel they feel?
I asked how the parents felt, how the staff felt parents were satisfied or not.
Okay, but if you could go back to the previous screen,
Sure.
the bottom question where it says parents said they have adequate access to training resources, where the staff asked, do you feel the staff has access to adequate training, or do you feel the parents have access
It was for the staff to have adequate
about
access.
themselves, as opposed to the question before that was staff asking about what the parents thought?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank
It's a
you.
good question, thank you. Parents feel encouraged to be an active participant in the IEP, 73%, while 90% of the staff felt parents are encouraged. Similar percentages, 60% of the parents and staff agree that parents are welcome to participate at the special ed advisory committee meetings and activities. Both parents and staff responded positively, pretty high, 79%, that the IEP team members follow up on actions and commitments made during IEP meetings. We're going to move forward now with the peer district analysis. As you can see, I'm not going over each one of these categories, but the peers were mainly selected on student enrollment. And you can see the numbers in total enrollment, special education, and so forth. So we use these peers as an agreed upon peer district. And if you get an opportunity to chat with those superintendents, Superintendent Noonan, their staff went out of the way to help provide some of the feedback for this study. And I promised them after it went public here, we would share it with their districts as a thank you for participating. So overall, when you compare your district with peers, your district had the highest graduation rate for all students, nearly 100%. At over 96%, Falls Church had the second highest graduation rate for students with disabilities, higher than the average. You had the lowest dropout rate for all students, significantly lower than the average, and a lower than average dropout rate for students with disabilities. I think there's some cause for celebration on this slide. With regard to your Virginia Standards of Learning, your district had significantly higher pass rates than the average for all subjects except for history and social science. And even in those two subjects was pretty comparable to the average. You also had significantly higher pass rates than the statewide average for all subjects. In the area of least restrictive environment, your district met all of the state targets and had the highest percentage of students of the peers included in regular classrooms 80% or more of the day. The lowest percentage of students included in regular classrooms, less than 40% of the day, and the lowest percentage of students served separately from the division schools. And by that last bullet, I mean that refers to private and residential settings. Just for your information, as of December 1 count, Falls Church had only 4 students in residential placement and 12 in private day placement. And as I said, that's the lowest percentage of students of your peers that are served outside of the district. All right, expenditures. Your district had the highest total expenditures in each of the 3 years, far above the average. The highest per pupil expenditures in each of the 3 years, 32% higher in 2016, 24% higher in 2017, and potentially looking into the future, 25% higher in 2018 when you compare yourself with the peers. Yes, sir.
Is that all students or just special ed students?
That's with special ed students.
Okay.
Overall, your teacher salaries are the highest, beginning step 1 annual salary, and a slightly lower step 1 master's degree supplement than the highest, which is Manassas Park, which is still maintained that your district is at the highest salary among all of your peers. In this report, you'll see an exhibit that's on page 20, and it details many of the accomplishments in special education since the year 2009. And in my report, I want to really hone in on some of the commendations that I found. However, I was asked to specifically spend more time on the recommendations, but I think you would be remiss not to celebrate some of these commendations. I saw a lot of good practices going on in the district, but I'm going to focus more on the recommendations in this presentation. The commendations include providing I'm going to call it the SPEAC. We love acronyms in education. The SPEAC members with an orientation notebook. Not all SPEAC districts provide their SPEAC members with a notebook and orientation, and that's to be commended. Next one, true professionalism and caring for students with special needs. That could not have come out more clearly across the board. In staff interviews, parent interviews, the professionalism and caring for the students was really commendable. I would encourage you to go to page 41 and 42 of my report, and you'll see some specific quotes from parents that will probably give you goosebumps. I had parents tell me they moved here because of the special ed program. I've had parents that I interviewed say they are in the military and they've traveled to a number of school districts across they didn't say the nation, they said the world. And they are happy to say that the special ed program is one of the best, here in Falls Church is one of the best they've seen in their travels. The next one is creating a preschool to serve special needs students in implementing a program, and the data shows that it's been successful. I think your preschool here is one of the best I've seen, and I've seen a lot across the nation, so they are to be commended for getting a good early start for those students with special needs. Okay, moving along, investing resources and providing behavioral specialists to assist schools. You right now have 4 behavioral specialists. Some of your peer districts have 0 behavioral specialists. So that is to be commended for adding staff to help students in behavioral issues. And behavioral specialists do a lot more in their job description. Embracing inclusion to ensure students are served in the least restrictive environment. We talked about that earlier. And in implementing a variety of research-based programs for students with special needs. Your district's implementing Read Well, Language Live, TransMath. Teachers in 3 of the schools are trained in the Orton Gillingham. You are implementing Teach Town. These are just to name a few of research-based programs that your district's implementing and should be commended for. Your foundation is awesome. Kudos to your foundation. They have raised, I want to say, if my 60 plus memory serves me right, it's over $14,000 in the past year just to supplement some of the programs here in Falls Church. So please take a look at page 47 to look at all of the variety of supplemental programs that they are funding through grants. I commended the district for providing adequate related services staff. That you look at your peers and you have 14 related service providers compared to your peers. Manassas Park only has 5.5 compared to your 14. And forgive me if I mispronounce this, is that Poquoson?
Poquoson.
Poquoson has only 6 when compared to your 14. So you are very well staffed in areas such as related services. Now, I heard some rumblings that the website was inadequate, but I reviewed it, and if you look at your peer districts, your website is very informative. It's up to date. You have special events, that all of the forums are updated online. You have frequently asked questions. You have a monthly newsletter. Could it be improved? Yes, if time permitted, there are several things that could be added, but overall, it's pretty solid website for not only staff but parents. Now we're going to the recommendations, and there were a total of 54 recommendations. I'm only going to cover a few of these recommendations that I think are some of the high-level recommendations. I think your school system should be commended for stepping up to the plate and having the study. A lot of districts think they can solve everything internally, and it's hard for someone from the outside coming in to drill you on what you do, how you do it, when you do it, how often you do it, and open your books. And I will say that I got full cooperation in asking for data, and so I commend you for stepping up to the plate to want to improve a good system to be even greater. So some of the recommendations, I'm going to go over these by the different categories. This is under leadership. Let's see here, go back. Well, I wanted to start this slide off with a little bit of trivia. Do you know what the number one position within a school district has the highest turnover rate in school districts across the nation? Just take a wild guess.
Special ed director.
Special ed director and special ed teachers are among the highest turnover rate of all district staff. Obviously, it's a very high demanding job. It's constant change in state and federal requirements that you have to keep up to date. You have parent complaints and pressure. It's a demanding job, and I also wanted to point out that when you have turnover, it's very costly to the district. So maintaining your good quality teachers and your staff at the central office is important. And just a little trivia in that it costs 30 to up to 150% of a salary, of that person's salary, to replace a position. When you look at the training, and I know Ms. High can identify with the cost of replacing employees and retraining. And so I just want to start this slide off with Ms. Germer has 31 direct reports, okay? A ton more than compared to your similar sized school district. Manassas Parks, special ed director, 4 reports. It's not atypical for a small district to wear multiple hats, but I'm afraid Ms. Germer could probably open up a hat shop because she's spread very thin, and she knows it, and there are things slipping through the cracks, and she's well aware of what it is, and we're going to point out some of those in recommendations, but I strongly think that you should reassign Title IX responsibilities from her to another designee. Take something off her plate so that she can get back into the classrooms more often, so she can model good instruction, have more parent workshops. I think by taking at least this Title IX responsibility from her, she'll have more time to do the types of things that encourage an excellent program. Ensure that all special ed leadership and special ed administrators meet formally once a month, a minimum of once a month, and do the following things. Study your system-wide data. I think it's been done, but it's kind of piecemeal. And I think it needs to be on a more systematic basis, discussing trends that you see across the data in the schools, sharing best practices. You've got some schools doing some great practices and their school next door doesn't even know about it. So meeting on a regular basis with special ed leadership would help develop a better program and assisting each other in overall scheduling and the delivery of special ed classes and services. It's apparent that sometimes your special ed department is working in a silo. I heard that in several interviews, and that each school is an island unto itself. You can get in that little trench where you go day to day and you don't look outside your own school, what's happening, and something needs to be done to pull all of your best practices together, share the best practices among your principals and your teachers. Establish a culture and process where general ed and special ed leaders meet formally, a minimum of once a month, to plan, analyze data, collaborate, and to ensure all schools have adequate special and general education collaborative planning time. There are a few examples in my report that show where there was a disconnect between general ed and special ed, and I don't think that Ms. High, Ms. Germer are I think they know well what some of the gaps are, but again, it's that wearing multiple hats, and there's only so much time in a day, and but there needs to be more of a culture of combining special and general ed into one, so that they're seamlessly working together. I think you should go back and revisit. There was another similar study done in 2010-11. By, I believe, a university gentleman, a professor from one of the universities. Good report. It'd be helpful for you to go back and read that. And most of the recommendations have been implemented from that report, but there are still 6 that are outstanding from the 2010-11 report that are only partially implemented. And the majority of the ones that have not been implemented revolve mostly around professional development. And I've covered that in a lot of my recommendations. We're going to talk a little bit about the SPEAC Special Ed Advisory Council recommendations. I think it's important to assign the committee members a homework assignment. Okay, if you have to do it over the summer to read all of the information, I don't think that they're aware of all of the tools that are available to them on the website. Not only do they get an orientation book, but there's a ton of tools on the Department of Education's website regarding their purpose, tools that they can use to function well. And I would give them a homework assignment to make sure that they do their homework and get prepared for meetings. I would post the SPEAC public comment form on your website to encourage parents to make public comments at meetings. I heard from quite a few parents that they didn't feel welcome in the past at the meetings, and this might be a way to help them feel more welcome by posting the public forum comment on your website and get them out to more meetings and participation. Require the chair to lead a self-assessment of the committee. Even the board, do you do a self-assessment as a board?
Did last year.
That's great to hear, because there are a lot of boards that do not do that. And every committee and board really should do a self-assessment. Where are we? What are we doing well in? What do we need to improve? And from some of the history I've heard of the SPEAC committee, I think that it would behoove your district to have a self-assessment of that committee. And I provided on page 30, I think, of the report, there's a sample self-assessment for that committee. You can alter it, but you're welcome to use those. It's from the Department of Education, so that they can step back and say, are we functioning as we are intended to? If not, we need to redirect, and I think that assessment will be helpful. I really think you should rotate the meetings from this building to each of the schools. A lot of districts have their meetings at the schools, and even board meetings at the various schools, so that you can showcase, have the principals come in, have some special ed students come in and show you some of the special things that they're doing. So I think that you might want to think about rotating your meetings, the SPEAC meetings, to each of the schools, so that you can actually be in the environment of the schools, see some of their classrooms, and have the students come in and teachers and principal to give you more of an update on what's really going on and what some of the challenges are. Plan for more meaningful meeting presentations from groups. I looked over quite a few of the agendas, and I think that there are some ways you could enhance the participation and get parents out by getting some more meaningful presentations from groups, such as your behavioral specialists could come. I don't, when I interviewed people, even staff at the schools, they weren't quite sure what the role behavior specialists are supposed to play. Get people out from Medicaid, Affordable Care Act, Special Olympics, make it a meeting that people will want to come out and learn more about it. Consider adding and rotating special education and one general education, middle or high school student to the committee on an ad hoc basis. After the report was published, I learned that the school board advisory committees do encourage student participation, but it wasn't readily apparent when I was here, and I didn't have an opportunity to interview any students that were on the committee. So I think beefing that up, because you can learn a lot from students. They don't mince words. They will tell you what's working and what's not pretty fast. Okay, policies and procedures. The first two bullets kind of go hand in hand, but several of the staff that I interviewed indicated lack of clarity on policies and procedures, and that could be because of turnover. It could be some of the principals, are newer to the position, but I think that the district needs to update your special education policies in alignment with the school board association policies, and I know that Tricia Minson has been working diligently on getting some of those policies updated, and to also have easy to find accompanying those policies as procedure. It's great to have strong policies, but you also need strong procedures to back up those policies. And some of the staff members, it was a little surprising to me that they just pick up the phone and call Liz, and before checking on these policies. So I think that they need to be more updated and familiar with the policies, and update the case manager's handbook, which was last updated in 2012. You might want to consider creating a decision-making tree or tools that are going to guide administrators to ensure they're following appropriate steps to ensure compliance. Sometimes I think that they are making some decisions where they're not thinking through all the possibilities and the steps, and decision-making tools can help guide them, and it will also help provide consistency from school to school, so they are not doing one thing at one school and a different thing at another. Boy, you need to host more. I can't tell you enough about training and professional development, and I know it costs money, but need to host training for all principals. You've got some principals that mean well, but they don't know special ed, and they're evaluating special ed, and they need training. Not all of them, but some of them need some specific training in special ed and related services staff that are working with your special ed students. Update them on the district policies and procedures as it relates to special ed. Okay, create a task force of related services personnel and create a more collaborative, focused, and intense strategic plan of early interventions of OT, speech, ABA, and social skills therapy for students diagnosed with autism. I think one of my number one things that I heard throughout a theme of the interviews is not enough resources for autistic children. Now, when you look at what all is offered, there's a lot offered for the autistic students and services, but I don't think it's well coordinated, and I don't think it's well advertised, And I think that you should create a task force specifically to create, I know you're busy with your strategic plan and looking at your program for autism and see where the strengths are, what needs to be improved, and how you can have a strategic drive to improve those services. The next bullet, please pay special attention to. It's to request either formally and immediately that the Department of Education include Falls Church with any new recipients of what they're calling the Students with Intensive Support Needs funds. I learned this as a result of interviewing some folks at the state and also at the district. But unlike many of the other Virginia school districts, there are 57 school districts in the state that are receiving this additional, it used to be called regional program funding. And now the state has turned it around and it's now called the Intensive Support Needs Funds. But the bottom line is 2 of your peers, Pequoson City, just last year in 16-17 received $300,000 in these funds from the state, in addition to what they're receiving. Now, hold on to your horses here because Manassas Park got $1.2 million in 16-17. So there's some inequity going on, and I used to work at the Florida DOE, and I can only say that I don't know what's going on there, but I do know that they're currently addressing this inequity by conducting a funding model change. But I think you could encourage them if you got your community out there writing your legislators and saying, wait a minute, you know? And I do think after my site visit, I learned that Liz Germer did write a letter, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, to try and find out, you know, a little bit more about this and to expedite it. But other districts are getting this funding that you are not. And so hopefully with a little added pressure from your legislators that they'll get this study moving and it'll be a little more equitable for all school districts and not just the 57.
Actually, a question on that.
Yes.
Does that get run through, and at one point you talk about a composite index, but we've got, you know, a statewide LCI, local composite index, where, you know, the more you can pay, the less you get. So for us, you know, we're at the highest, so out of every dollar we send down to Richmond, we get 20 cents back.
Right.
Would this be run through that? Because we find a lot of state programs that sound good, like, you know, we're gonna get you everybody's going to get a new kindergarten teacher. Well, what it comes down to is when you run it through the index, we ended up getting like $14,000. So I'm just curious, does this get through that wood chipper that, you know, ends up giving us almost nothing?
I honestly, John, can't answer your question because they're still working on the formula. But I would start asking questions at the state level.
It's coming.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Liz is coming up.
They would like to not have it run through the local composite index as the fund.
We all.
It's going to be proportional, what they're looking at. So they're trying to look at what would be the formula that would determine the allocation. And it would be proportional based on the number of students. So we're always going to be less because we have fewer students. They're talking about a potential rollout over a 2-year period, and they have to focus on the maintenance of effort issue.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking at a lot of different components to try to move it forward, but we have already sent the letter saying that if they make this change, that we would like to participate in the program funding.
Okay,
And then
good.
we have the ability to determine what that would look like, how we would want to use those funds. It's really more of a local decision, whereas now the regional program funding is a regional program that was originally designed for school systems that didn't have a place to send or serve high-need students. So they would regionally pool funds and send their students to those locations. But the increased enrollment in those, coupled with the really disproportionate allocation of funding, has raised this issue, because we all have those students. There's no regional program in Northern Virginia except for Manassas. That's the regional program. So there's no regional program between Arlington, Fairfax, Alexandria, or for us to be able to access.
So is this a Virginia State Assembly thing? I mean, do we need to put this on Lila's plate for lobbying next year?
From a political standpoint, I don't know, I know it's going
Maybe Evelyn
through
answered.
some of the, because it's a funding piece, I think there's a tie to that, but Peter, you may know better than I.
Yeah, first I'm going to ask you if you'd like to join us.
Yeah, sit.
Chair.
Yeah.
Instead of standing. But Ms. Germer's exactly right. It was when the regional centers began to decentralize, and they got rid of some beds, for lack of a better term. They started putting students back into their local communities, and with that came some funding. And as Ms. Germer mentioned, there is not a regional center in Northern Virginia with the exception of Manassas City, and that's why as a region, for those of you that may not know, I serve as the Region 5 chair, or our Region 4 chair, excuse me. We surveyed all of the schools in the region, and they were the only school system that was receiving any of the money. And that was, part of the reason for that was because they were the only division that was actually sending students to a regional center, if that helps at all.
Okay. Well, and it just sounds like we might actually get real money. Getting less because we have fewer is one thing. Getting less simply because we're us is different.
But more directly to your question, Mr. Lawrence, is it a Lilla Wise question? I think it's more of a VDOE question as they're trying to figure out how to get this money out. So we'll continue to push it from the regional perspective as well.
Well, I mean, politicians can also, write to VDOE on our behalf. It's not just are they
True.
passing legislation. So,
True.
thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay. Let's see. Sorry. RTI, response to intervention. You have a good manual and you have a good process in place, but it's teachers are on systems overload. And I think that it would behoove the district to condense the process into some kind of user-friendly, maybe a one-pager, because you get this big document and it's just overwhelming for a lot of teachers. And so I think perhaps if you condense the process into a more user-friendly document and have some training on it, or a flow chart that teachers can use to keep track of implementing RTI would be helpful. And then it's not being implemented with fidelity at all of the schools. In some schools, they're doing a good job, others they're not. So ensure that principals include how well a teacher is implementing RTI when they do their performance evaluation of teachers, and when those principals are being evaluated, need to see how they're embracing RTI, or if they aren't, to give them some guidance and training on implementing RTI. Related services, establish a unified data collection tools for all related services staff. This is to uniformly collect school-wide data. This is not student-specific. But some of the related services staff would show me how they're collecting data, and others would be collecting in a different way. I think that they need to sit down and unify their process and make it stronger. Create and implement a system for updating parents on the status of their child's related services progress, and how parents can work with their children at home in addition to the quarterly progress reports. Really, this doesn't just apply to just the related services. This could be to the entire IEP team. Just better communication plans need to be developed to help parents keep more up to date as they go along, and not just wait for the progress report, so that they can know how to help their students, their child at home, rather than wait for a quarterly progress report. IEPs. I randomly selected and reviewed many IEPs, and some of my findings with regard to IEPs is to require the IEP teams to use division-approved rubric when evaluating the quality of a written IEP and for the degree of implementation of the IEPs. There's a rubric that's been developed, and it's a very good rubric. I reviewed it, but it's not being used. And the rubric is not doing any good if it's not being used. So that's another part of your principal training and staff training, is to make sure they're using the tools that are there to help them be successful. Create and deliver ongoing and embedded training for all general ed and special ed teachers on writing effective IEPs. including troubleshooting for the Cs, that stands for Special Education Automated System, effective IEP meetings, and implementing and record keeping for the implementation of IEPs. Those are some of the areas that really popped out for needing training. And I could spend the rest of the evening telling you about all the complaints about the Cs system, but it's not intuitive. It doesn't automatically correct. A lot of good systems won't let you move to the next page until the other page is correct. There's not a good checks and balances on the Cs. However, I think you're kind of stuck with it because it's a very expensive system and the state's coming out with a new system, and it would not be cost effective for you to try to change it at this point. But what you could do is make sure that you have some troubleshooting for the teachers when they come across these quirks in the system, that they know where to go to get help quickly. Usually they're trying to ask another colleague who's busy, and then they end up just going ahead and trying to do it themselves. So again, professional development is really important. Require principals to randomly select and review IEPs on a regular basis and work with staff to improve any shortfalls. I think that some of your principals are doing a better job of this than others, but all of them should be randomly selecting and reviewing IEPs using the rubric and working with those staff to where he or she sees that the IEPs are not up to speed or up to quality that the student desires and deserves. Track and monitor students who exit special ed. This is kind of minor, but if students have met their goals and they're dismissed, it's good to track those students, particularly I think the majority of those are speech students, to track to see how many students are achieving their goals and how many have graduated out of their special ed goals. I couldn't find any evidence of a tracking there. Set the expectation that any staff working closely with the student on implementing his or her IEP attend in person the IEP meetings. That seems to be problematic in some of the schools where some people call in or the people that are working the closest with the students don't show up and another teacher shows up instead. And when you're training those principals in the IEP training, how important it is for the parent and the student to be there and to be there in person, not by phone. Professional development, or excuse me, where am I? Did I skip the section? Conduct a needs assessment or use the results of this survey to establish a stakeholder team of general and special ed teachers to create and systematically implement a system-wide professional development plan. Again, it's kind of being done piecemeal and it's not coordinated, and you can spend a lot of money doing piecemeal professional development. If it's coordinated, it'll not only give you more quality professional development, but it won't cost as much. Conduct intensive special ed training with your principals. Again, that's kind of repeating, but it's important finding. Create a system-wide walkthrough instrument that allows administrators to regularly provide informal feedback to staff. Some of your principals are using a tool to give staff feedback. Others are just doing it informally. Some staff say they never get feedback. So I think that by creating a system-wide instrument that administrators are what they're specifically looking for as they do their walkthroughs through the classrooms is a good tool for them. Ensure that your special ed school-based administrators provide feedback on teachers' evaluation. Those special ed administrators have a wealth of knowledge, and some of them are not even being asked to help provide feedback in conducting some of the teachers' evaluations. And I think that they could be tapped into for better feedback and quality feedback for the special ed teachers on their evaluations. Parent involvement. Seek a business partner or the public library for assistance in setting up a special ed parent resource center. Your central office does have a resource center here, but it's not being actively used. There are a number of reasons. Some parents feel intimidated by coming here. Sometimes there's parking issues. So I think that there's some good resources here, but they're not being used. So maybe you could find a partner, or even your public library, to set up a resource center, and after hours, parents, say, I can't come get a book because usually central office closes at 5 and I don't get off till 5. So trying to find a business partner that will help with that public sharing of the resource center would be helpful. I think you should try to host a monthly principal, or perhaps Superintendent Noonan, some coffees specifically targeting parents of special ed students, not necessarily specific for special ed parents, but that involve special ed topics in those coffees. Harness parent advocates' talents and energies in a non-accusatory, synergistic, and transparent forum through the SPEAC meetings and subcommittees. It's not a secret that the SPEAC has been dysfunctional in the past. I think you have a very good group now that's willing to work with some training. I know that this year's group decided not to have subcommittees. I would ask you and encourage you to revisit that, because subcommittees can be very effective if they're used appropriately. It's not to say that a subcommittee should go in and start doing what administrators should be, doing with special ed, but they can be used effectively to help move some issues forward, and particularly issues that are important to parents. I think there's been too much time and energy wasted in the past in what some of the folks I interviewed coined as an us versus them mentality. And I think this only really does a disservice to your students, and I think that you need to try to work as one, as that committee with the administration, and let the enemies be outside your district, not within. Okay, ensure parents and staff are surveyed yearly. Really important. They really appreciated being surveyed. It's important to take the survey results and let them be heard and make sure that it's confidential, and then to act upon those survey results that are appropriate. Set up a stakeholder committee or assign a SPEAC committee to investigate key, consistent parent complaints and seek ways to address all appropriate concerns. Now, I'm not referring to specific student complaints. I'm referring to school-wide, district-wide types of issues that a stakeholder committee might be helpful. With regard to next steps, although this study was voluntary, I say our team, this was conducted by IBM, itty bitty me. I suggest that you post the report, and I think it already has been posted, and make it very transparent. Prioritize all of the recommendations. A, B, C, or D, we're not implementing this because, just prioritize them and create an implementation plan. Assign a point person, and then go back also and look at that last study as well, and include that in the implementation plan. Assign a point person to actively monitor the implementation status, and then report the status on a regular basis to the board and to the SPEAC committee. And then I think it's important that there are a lot of commendations in the report, that you showcase those to other surrounding districts, to your parents, because there are a number of positive best practices going on in the district that can be used to showcase your commendations. I used to be a former debate coach, so I stand ready for cross-examination. Any questions, further questions?
Thank you very much for
I apologize if I went over time.
Detailed presentation. We appreciate that. And now I know Mr. Lawrence has
Yeah, but
a
since
nice
Margaret's
question, but
the
any
expert,
other
so she wants to go first.
folks' questions?
I
Ms. Ward?
thought this was a well-presented, and I'm a special education teacher. I just agree with so many of these recommendations.
Thank you.
And I really don't have any questions for you. Thank you.
Margaret.
You're welcome.
Ms. Gill, did you have any?
No, I don't actually have any. It was a really great report, very comprehensive, and I thank you so much.
Yeah.
Just me.
Mr. Lawrence?
Okay. Some are for you, and I think some are more for staff. One question is, how did you pick the peers? Because it seems like
This was
it's
tough.
a lot of it's
This was a tough
size.
one because of your high-performing school district and because of the expenditures and your budget. And so I ended up going with numbers of student enrollment and size. That was the main indicator for the peers.
Okay, I mean, it seemed to be that. It just, I think when all of us measure ourselves, we measure ourselves against Arlington and Fairfax, which are obviously, you know, Fairfax has, what, almost 200,000 kids, so it's, you know, not even close, but.
Right. I try to pick equitable ones with regard to the number of students you're serving.
Okay. Did you, and I looked in the back and didn't see it, did you collect data on time either as a special ed teacher or time in Falls Church as a special ed teacher? Because, you know, you said turnover is costly.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the questions, you know, do you feel like you have enough training to do your job? If it's a teacher who's been here a year, you know, that's not good. If it's somebody who's been here 5 years, that's really not good. I mean, is there any way did you collect anything like that to be able to tell?
I did not. I did not,
Okay.
but that would be a good follow-up question in your next survey, I think.
Okay. Yeah, it's not that, you know, one is more valuable than another, but if you have 15 years of experience walking out the door, it's very different than someone who's been here a year. So.
Right.
Okay.
Good point.
All right.
I have one
Peers.
I do have
Yeah.
one question for
Sure.
you, Dr. Cox. I was just looking at the overview of peer division analysis regarding expenditures.
Mhm.
And when you're referring to the highest total expenditures in each of the 3 years, are you strictly referring to special education students?
Well, that's a good point, and we went over that question earlier. If you look on page 14 of the report, I give you in Exhibit 210, expenditures, that's for overall expenditures, but then if you look on the next page, it's expenditures for students with disabilities, Exhibit 211.
Okay.
So I give you the overall expenditures as well as what the state reports as expenditures for students with special needs.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, it's
Mm-hmm.
for budget issues.
Just one thing for us before we post it on page 8. It says, you know, more than 2,400 students. We're now, what, more than 2,700? So if we could just get that corrected, I think that would.
Just for clarity, it has been posted.
Oh,
So,
well, I mean, for board docs, yes, but,
yep,
you know, if,
fair enough.
for the future. I found it interesting that we've got the highest percentage of special ed enrollment, the largest enrollment of English language learners, and the smallest enrollment of economically disadvantaged. That was just sort of an interesting combination, and I don't really know what to make of it, but I thank you for highlighting it, since we never would have known that otherwise. Yeah, the fact that poor Liz has 31 direct reports made my head hurt. So hopefully that's something that'll get fixed. And also on pages 22 and 23, when you're talking about, you know, all the different hats and everything, that just makes it clear that everybody who's going to be sitting here next year working on the budget needs to get more central office help, since hopefully now that it's in black and white, we can get the funding. You know, on page 49, where you said that not all principals are 100% on board with implementing the RTI model, that just really seemed disturbing. I mean, you touched on it, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to say. I mean, the fact that they're not some are not evaluating teachers based on the effectiveness is also bad, but it seems like principals should be fully on board with something as fundamental as that. So I don't know if you want to say
A good,
something.
strong
or-
RTI model I can't say enough good words about strong RTI models, because it gives the interventions at an early age. It can possibly cut down on students being referred if they're given appropriate interventions at the appropriate time. And Some of your principals just, they kind of like, well, I can't say some, but some of the ones I interviewed.
There's only 4, Dr.
I
Cox.
know, that's, in a small population, you have to be very careful. Let's just say that not all of them are on board with it and not implementing it with fidelity.
Okay. Well, let's just say that's your problem right now.
It is something that we need to look at. I do want to comment, and I want to be very careful here, because the one thing I don't want to be perceived as is defensive, because I don't want to be defensive in this process. But I will say we're coming off of 3 days of really good retreat with our principals, where we spent some time off-site talking about what our goals for the coming year are. And part of the goals that we have, I think, really relate in many ways to what the conversation is that's in this document. One is around systemness. Are we a school system or a system of schools? And we need to be a school system so that we don't have what you perceived, which is, we have one school next door to another who doesn't know what's going on next door. That's a problem that we need to be able to address. The second thing that we're really paying attention to is language, and language is culture, right? And so how do you establish a culture in a school division? It's through common language. So one of the things that we started to talk very strongly about in our retreat was, what does good first-tier high-quality instruction look like, so that we have best first practice in that first tier? Just using the language of first tier and talking about that as the base portion of that RTI model, I think begins to get at some of these concerns regarding fidelity of implementation around the RTI model, because we really are now beginning to, continuing, not wasn't there before, but continuing to have a conversation around tiers of instruction and tiers of intervention. And I think that language that I'm fortunate enough to bring to the system also, I think, can be useful. And the last piece of it, and I don't want to hold out to the end, because I don't know how many people are going to stick around after you are done, but as we began to look at what are our overarching goals going to be as part of our plan, one of the big pieces that we see as a need is to really focus in on our special populations, and that includes our special needs students and our ESOL students. So you're going to see, as a consequence of that being a goal for us as a staff and as a division to really look at, those pieces that I think are indicated in here with respect to professional development and professional learning and training for our leaders and for our teachers, because we do recognize that we need to buoy that up. And it is a consequence in many ways to the multiple hats that Ms. Germer wears. And I appreciate you commending her work in this study, because I do think, given the hand she's been dealt, she's done it extraordinarily well, considering. So anyway, all that to say, I'm glad to have these recommendations. And what's interesting to me is, when you talk about triangulating data, one of the things I learned very quickly is that, this is one data point, the principals are another data point, and the central office is another data point, and all three of us are sort of saying, these are some areas of focus that we need to pay attention to. So I think that's a powerful moment for us, I think, around some of this.
Just at the top of page 50, where you're talking about, again, RTI, having a full-time staff member, but then you say, in addition to a full-time specialist, the division pays $1,000 a day for RTI consultants to assist schools with the implementation of RTI. The way I go, I see $1,000, I see day, I immediately say there are 365 days in a year, so we're paying $365,000 for a consultant. I know, but my point is, I don't know if there's a way we can clarify that in here or some way, because I think that's just something you could very easily misunderstand. And
Good point.
In this kind of environment, we don't want to be seen having, a full-time specialist and, we have a Cadillac, and we're buying 2 Mercedes on top of it on a daily basis. That's all.
And he comes 8 days throughout the school year. So.
Yeah, I know. That's a better number to use than $1,000 a day.
Try to be perfect, but
I know it's.
but no,
these tiny little
you make
reports.
very good points, John. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, but also it's just looking at it. You're looking at it from a different lens than
Right.
we are, and just the financial and budget perception, makes a difference, and we want to make sure that we keep doing what we're doing.
Well, I think the money you're spending with a consultant, plus having the full-time RTI person, that more focus should be on training those principals that aren't on board to, that's a lot of money to invest and make sure that everyone's on board with the process.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Dr. Noonan is on it already, so I think we're on the right track.
Just on page 59, where you're talking about the new Supreme Court ruling in versus Douglas County, and I don't know, Tricia, is this something? It seems like special ed is such a big part of what we do. Should the board get some sort of explanation as to why that's important?
Why special education is important?
No,
No,
the
why this
court
case
the Douglas
is,
case.
because she talks about, the far-reaching implications. Right, and not, you don't have to go and spend 3 weeks and then do
I
a
gave a
2-hour
presentation to our
presentation.
special ed folks about it recently. I'd be happy to share that with the board.
I could do that right now if you'd like.
We'll put that in the Friday update for you. How about that?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just, it seems like, you flagged it as important, and, specifically flagged it for the SPIAC, so, but given the population and the growth, it seems like we should know too.
Absolutely.
And then, final annoying yellow sticky. On page 61, at one point you said, one staff member stated that she had a choice to either get reimbursed mileage for traveling school to school or to have professional development opportunities. Either that person is driving a crazy amount, or that just seems to make absolutely no sense that anyone would say that. And there may not be anything, you can say about it, but I think if you could give a more comprehensive explanation of, the situation here, because if someone's saying, I have a choice of getting, 34 cents a mile or getting professional development, I find that hard to believe, and it seems like this person was given a very mistaken impression. At least that's what I'm optimistically hoping.
I just report as I hear, but this particular person, and it is a small district, felt that they would rather choose to have professional development over getting reimbursed for travel. That's how important they felt, that they wanted more training.
Well,
That's
okay,
not being-
see, what you just said there is different than what you said here. Here, you made it sound like that was the choice she had been given, as opposed to now you're saying if she were given a choice, she would choose professional development. So if that's what it is, to me, that's very different. Thinking that somebody felt like I can either get reimbursed or I can get professional development, and that already happened, that would be worrying. So anyway, yeah, it's something, just, clarify it and, maybe give some more context for the
We
superintendent.
have some staff members who travel from school to school to school and also have to travel to like Fairfax County or other placements or other places. So they're not just housed. And I think, the budget, when you look at the budget, the line item, it covers professional development, travel, et cetera, is under one pot. So there's X amount of money in this one pot. So I think that's where that perception comes from, is there's X amount of money in this, and if their travel exceeds, they're not going to submit travel because they want to use the money for conferences or something.
Right, yeah, if it
That's
comes
where
down.
it's- that's where it's coming
Yeah,
from.
if it's a
But
perception of how big the pot is and you're sort of forced to make a choice, even though nobody comes to you and says you have to make a choice, I mean, that's something you need to know, because that's not really acceptable.
Not really acceptable, but in some ways sort of good news. Only because one of the things that we know is that teacher efficacy comes from feeling like you're doing a good job, and one of the ways you can do a good job is by getting that training and support. So I hear what you're saying, though.
Okay.
I also just wanted to mention the some of the co-teaching that I witnessed in the classrooms is phenomenal. And if there's a way you could get some of those teachers that are doing a good job of their co-teaching to do some professional development, because they were a seamless team. You couldn't tell which one was the special ed teacher, which one was the general ed, and you couldn't tell, the special ed students weren't grouped, they were intermingled, and it was pretty phenomenal. Then I saw some not so good co-teaching. So I think you've got some great pockets of awesome staff, just kind of making sure that you can harness those talents and get it out into professional development opportunities for other teachers to see. So, I thank you for this opportunity, and always would look forward to coming back. If you have any transportation, HR, or love to come back to Falls Church. And my philosophy is that I will stand ready to help you implement. If you want to pick up the phone or send an email, or you have follow-up questions in the report, because your success in implementing this recommendation is my success. And I see a great school system here, and I think with the some tweaking and with some of these recommendations, it can only be better. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With so many different recommendations and things that were out there, and I think with Dr. Noonan and the staff to just take the opportunity and time to review and implement those and give us a list of potential prioritizations of some of the recommendations of this current report, as well as the recommended, looking at the one from several years ago, and potentially have another work session in the future, bring forth some recommendations that we could potentially look at as a board to potentially see how we can move forward to improve upon an already, I think, very good special ed system, which I think she reiterated that we have some great things that make us stand out as a good overall system. But as anything, there's always room for improvement, and I think giving our staff, with Liz and her analysis that she has done and continues to do, we definitely appreciate all that you didn't realize that it was so many hats that you wear. I knew you wore several, but I didn't realize actually someone sitting down and counting all the different roles and things that you do, that it's so many. But definitely looking at opportunities to implement, taking something off of your plate too, so you can be able to focus a little bit more on that. I think it's important, something that we need to look at and potentially do. But with that, thank you all for coming and listening to this, and we're gonna move on to conversation about our triennial plan, and turn back over to Dr. Noonan.
Right. Thank you again, Mr. Chair. So in your packet of materials tonight, you have two documents. One is the current, let's see, how should I say that? This is the current Falls Church City Public Schools triennial plan in its sort of original format, if you will. And this is the one that you have adopted last year. And what you have in addition to that is one that says, and it's that previous one is 17 to 19, and the working draft, and I just want to say that it's a working draft up front for FY 18 through 20. Tonight is meant to just be sort of a high-level communication about the triennial plan information, just to give you a sense of where we are. Being new, one of the things that I, along with the staff, recognized very quickly was, as we started to dig into the triennial plan that was in place from this current past year, the 17 to 19 plan, that it was, I don't want to say not strategic, because I think that there were some pieces of it that were strategic, but in many ways it looked more like a work plan than a strategic plan, as we did an analysis of it. And just as an example of that, under excellent staff, for example, the third bullet is to increase teacher pay to be no more than 3 to 5% lower than Arlington by June of 2017. That's a very specific action that the staff took on behalf of the board to get to this notion of excellent staff. So we, as a leadership team here in the central office, met last Friday, not last Friday, the Friday previous, and we began to sort of take a pass at what, first of all, who are we as a division, based on some of the conversations that I've had with the board, with the city council, with members of the community, with parents, with students, and the like, and tried to put that together in a way that sort of began to make some sense. And then from that, we said, so if this is sort of who we are, and that revised vision and mission, if you will, on the second page, which is the FY 18-20 plan is sort of who we are and what we aspire to be, which is to be a premier international baccalaureate school division, then what is it from a strategic perspective that we need to do to get there? So we took the major headings that you once called pillars, the vision, mission, excellent staff, 21st century teaching and learning, small classes, modern secure schools, readiness for learning, community engagement, and responsible fiscal management. And first took a pass at those to say, are there redundancies in those pillars? And if so, can we begin to collapse those or think about them in ways that perhaps are, again, more strategic? And what we landed on was, instead of pillars, and I know that this is splitting hairs on language a little bit, but we developed out of these pillars what we would consider 5 priorities. And these priorities then are student-centered teaching and learning, excellent staff, optimal facilities and learning environment, fiscal management, and community engagement. We felt like there were a number of things in some of the previous categories that could be aligned, collapsed, put together, etc. Then what we did as a leadership team is we took the bullets that were underneath your previous priorities, and we started to look at those to see, one, have we accomplished those? Are those done? So for example, the third bullet on increasing teacher pay to be no more than 3 to 5% lower than Arlington by 2017, you guys have achieved. So why would we then put it into our strategic plan in that sort of fashion? So instead what we did was, under excellent staff, we changed that, and what you'll see is the fourth bullet, which is to ensure FCCPS salaries remain regionally competitive. I think that's a much more strategic statement than being specific around the 3 to 5% lower than Arlington. So we started to rework these bullets and pull them underneath what these new 5 priorities were. And what you see tonight is sort of our first pass at this. Once we had completed that, and I want to thank our teams, specifically I want to take a moment just to recognize Tricia Minson and John Brett, because each of them were the wordsmithers on this. And I know that trying to take all of our language and pull it together and figure out how to make it work was really hard. But once we landed on these bullets, we then had our principal retreat last week with principals, assistant principals, and directors also. We had central office leadership there as well. And we asked them to take a look at this document and say, what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be refined, what needs to be tweaked. So all of that to say that what we're bringing you tonight, we as a team, a collective leadership team, is a somewhat revised vision that in many ways is more, we think, more grammatically correct, but that's neither here nor there. But something that sort of streamlines who we are, what we're about, and just for purposes of the public, if it's all right, I'll read it. And that's: Falls Church City Public Schools is a student-centered, innovative, and inclusive community of lifelong learners. We strive to guarantee a personalized environment that supports each child's unique needs, where each achieves at least 1 year academic growth annually, and where every graduate is prepared for their next step in life as a responsible, caring, and internationally minded citizen. We think that that reflects, one, sort of the all-purpose mission statement that you could pick up off of any school website probably, but it also is honing in on who we are. And so you're going to see things like individualized, you're going to see unique needs, you're going to see responsible, caring, and internationally minded, because we think that that gets to IB. And then what we also talked about was great organizations have a common sort of organizational thought or an organizational philosophy by which they try to achieve. And so where we landed in terms of our organizational thought is that we aspire to be the premier international baccalaureate school division. And then to that end, we focus on the following priorities from 2018 to 2020. So tonight, what I'm inviting you to do is to take this document with you and take a look at it and see, one, does it speak to, in your mind as a board, who we are? Does it get at something that's a little bit more strategic than perhaps the past work plans or the triennial plans? What's there that can be commended, and what perhaps is missing? What needs to be taken care of to add to? Because ultimately what we'd like to do, and this was the next step in our process, by the way, was with the principals, we started to develop some action steps that would go behind each of these bullets. So if it's our goal, for example, to attract, hire, retain, and exceptional diverse staff to meet the needs of all students, what are we going to do to make that happen? So when you get the work plan that would go behind this, you'll see some very actionable steps that we would anticipate would have some sort of measure or metric behind it that we can take a look at over the course of the next 3 years. It's a lot of talking. I have one more point, and then I'll sort of leave it to questions or ask my colleagues to sort of pick up where maybe I missed a spot. The last piece that I want to say is that I think this is an intermediate plan. I think that a triennial plan is a nice idea, but I'm not sure that 3 years is long range enough, given the fact that we're going through potentially a bond structure for a new high school. We have just been validated in our MYP program, and we have some big goals for ourselves between now and the next 5 years. So we're calling this affectionately on the inside Strategic Plan 1.5, where we went from the triennial plan, which is 1.0. This would be 1.5, and then next year, I'm going to advocate that we go into a full strategic planning process, that we actually go out to the community and revisit who we are, what we're about, and put together some really significant big ideas that we want to be when we grow up, right? And think 5 years, think 10 years, think 15 years, and think 20 years, and engage the community around what do these bullets need to look like? Are these right? And if not, what do we need to revise and how do we make them better? So again, this is sort of an intermediate step. We need to have something in place before we start the school year. The best news, I think, about this is that at least our principals and our central office folks have all been engaged. We still need to engage our teachers, but this gives us a blueprint, if you will, for how we can move forward as a division. So if I can ask my colleagues, is there anything I missed?
I think you covered pretty well. And just want to include that we included transportation, food service, daycare in this conversation as well. So we really looked at all of our leaders.
Who are very pleased to be part of this.
I was just going to say I ran into one of those folks, and they were very pleased to be a part of that leadership discussion this year.
Tricia?
The only thing I'd add is if you have questions about why words were changed or why sections were changed, we did spend a lot of time talking as a leadership team, listening to what the principals and assistant principals wanted changed. So if the wording looks very different from what it was before, you want to know why. We have a lot of those notes and what the discussion was about, and would welcome sharing that with you all so that you at least get a picture of why sections were changed or what the vision looked like there. One of the things that Dr. Noonan encouraged was to look at what is the IB learner profile that we want all of our students to be engaged in, and working that language into the expectations we already had, but how do we make sure that that runs across the gamut for all students from K through 12 students who are ESOL students have special needs, and we're really meeting the needs of all of the special populations and all students every day.
Because that learner profile is not reserved for just IB diploma candidates. It's not reserved for just those students that are getting the MYP certificate. It really is meant to serve all kids. And when you look at this notion of being unique learners and being a community that's inclusive, I think that learner profile brings in that inclusivity piece in a way that's very powerful for us. I apologize it's not redlined. I understand from a conversation today that I had with someone who shall remain nameless that you guys like things that are redlined, and we will work on that in the future. But we did want to give you...
Just to make that clear, I don't.
We did want to give you the side-by-side look, though, so that you could see, okay, what's changed.
I prefer that.
So, with that, Mr. Chair, I'd encourage any questions that you might have tonight, or if you want to take this, digest it, think about it, and provide some feedback, we certainly would welcome that.
I would like to say one thing, and I did read this before the meeting. I do like the way this reads better. I think it reads better. I think it's clearer, and it's more concise and less wordy. That's redundant. Now I'm not being concise.
It's bigger font. And it still fits on one page.
Got that going too. But I do like this this form. And I do like what I've seen so far, and I look forward to seeing the final version.
Thank you.
Any other initial reaction feedback? Ms. Ms.
No, I thank you. to everyone on the staff, especially for going through this. And I'm really looking forward to the larger strategic planning process. I think that will be great to engage the wider community, especially as we're going through this large facilities planning process, to let everyone know, listen, we're listening to everyone, who are we as a city? And I think the community will really respond well to that, and it would be nice to have a formal strategic plan, at least 5 years in place.
Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah. Now, I would just say, I mean, hopefully people told you that we didn't even have a 3-year plan until, what was it, 2013, maybe? So, I mean, moving us along forward, I think we've gotten used to this enough that we're ready for the next jump. But getting to this point was a push because no one had ever looked beyond a year before.
Gotcha.
So, and you know, offline and with others you can talk about, there were reasons for specifics. I mean, some people felt like what we were talking about was, you know, we like puppies, and it's, you know, what kind of breed, you know, how old, things like that, where it came down to, you know, you can make things general enough where they really don't say anything, or they can say anything anybody wants to believe they say because they don't actually say anything. So, and some things don't lend themselves to specifics. The salary thing, we needed to be specific because we had to shoot for a number that we would be able to plug into our budget. But, you know, other things like, you know, increased community engagement. Well, you don't want to say have 6 meetings instead of 5. You want to increase what you've been doing and go forward that way. So I appreciate the context you just gave, because honestly, when I first looked at it, I had a big Whiskey Tango Foxtrot moment where I looked at it and said, this doesn't look anything like what we've done before, which isn't a bad thing. But yeah, I definitely want to think about it and then, you know, digest a little.
Yeah.
But thank you. I mean, this clearly took a lot of time. Nothing this short is done quickly.
Thank you for that feedback. We did appreciate, as we went through the previous one, we sort of not played a game, but we sort of went through, why do you think that's there? What was the strategic thinking about this particular bullet, and what was the impetus behind it? And there were a number of them in there that we sort of got to, okay, this was in here for a reason, and here's the reason why it was there. So we certainly tried to be empathetic to that as well as we went through it.
Well, but also the fact that there was a reason last year or, you know, 2 years ago for it to be in there doesn't mean that reason is still here. And sometimes it's good to have something completely different, because then if you want to put something back in, you need to have a reason to put it back in, which is you have to justify it more than just keeping something in. So, you know, that's also a benefit to make people make a case, you know, do you still want this in, and if so, why?
Under optimal facilities and learning environments, you'll see 2 bullets. The first is educate students in high quality facilities to support best practices for teaching and learning. And the second is design or redesign facilities to be innovative, energy efficient, healthy, and sustainable. I'm not sure that in 3 years that same bullet will be in there, sort of to your point. I think that it's there because we're right in the middle of a process that we want to make sure that we hit these things.
Right, and the idea is things should roll on and roll off, because if something just stays all the time, with the exception of something maybe like small class size, you want to actually accomplish things.
Other questions? For me, it's I think it's a great starting point of looking at this and actually making it a little bit more strategic, long term. And as Mr. Lawrence said, it's definitely something that we kind of took the first stab at, and I think good at that first stab. But I think we are moving along to and wanting to expand that to think as we're coming up with possible facilities and showing that we are thinking more long-term versus year to year, which I think has potentially caught us a little bit on some of the facilities planning that we have done between our side and general government. I think if we just become a little more strategic in our thinking and planning as the system kind of moves along, and knowing at points where having to do some upgrades, different things are going to have to happen. But I think like the vision statement quite a bit of saying that of a system that was founded and one of the first in the state to get to the full program with the IB program. I think we definitely need to make that stand out and continually work towards expanding on that and growing and making ours the premier program here. So I think we're at a good point. I think we all just are taking the opportunity to absorb and review this a little bit more. And I think as you all think about it more, come up with any questions or possible thoughts about it, please get them to the staff so that next time that we look at this and get to the point of voting on it before the school year starts, so that they can have time to review it, and you all have time to go back and forth with questions before we get to the voting time for it. So.
And Mr. Chair, we anticipate bringing this back to the next work session in August with some more of the backup documentation that says here's what our work plan is behind it. So the more information you can share with us, the better.
I have
Ms. Ward?
just one comment, and you brought this up before about ensure all students develop critical thinking and creative problem-solving skills through the IB programs. And I'm glad you clarified that meant all kids, not just the ones in the IB program. You might want to add a little language that just clarifies that for someone looking at this for the first time.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Anything else for the?
Well, not on this, but just speaking of, August, since it's almost August, do we have any more clarity on when, we're meeting for the rest of the summer and goals to accomplish? Because we talked about that, I guess, last time we were in this room. And
We did, and I think we're still the plan, if need be, of an additional meeting. Again, we're always open to do that. Thinking about it a little bit more, for me, and I'll talk with Dr. Noonan offline a little bit more about it, but I'm just kind of finishing out the test of seeing of the two meeting process work. We'll finish out seeing how that works, but I am open to the potential of the 3 meetings if need be, to make sure that we get everything done, because there will be times I'm quite sure and that 3 meetings may need to be had. So I think being open at least to that and have the discussion, I think a little bit more in depth during our retreat is going to be a good time to talk a little bit more about that too, as we all get together and have that conversation as a board to kind of map out how the meeting schedule and making sure that we all like to have less meetings, but just to make sure that we have enough meetings to make sure that things that need to get done versus we're trying to cram a lot and for the sake of avoiding having additional meetings. None of us want those, but definitely we, over the last 4 years, all know that there are times this week, for example, that a lot of meetings are happening of last night, tonight, tomorrow. So definitely we know that. So it's just a lot of trying to see what we can do to tighten up our schedule and use the meetings as efficiently as possible.
Perhaps also what may be useful to you all is that we as a staff are starting to populate a list. And I understand there used to be a sort of a running list of items that you would like to accomplish and see. If it's okay with you, and we'll send it out Friday, sort of the very drafty. But what we've tried to do is we've tried to take each of the work sessions and the school board meetings throughout the year and begin to populate those with things that are going to happen in those meetings so that you can see kind of a year at a glance to say, okay, here's where the first budget meetings are. Here's where we're going to be having work sessions around the budget. Here's where we're going to be talking about the triennial plan. Here's where we're going to be talking about whatever the case may be. So that may be useful to you all just to kind of see that.
I think it definitely will be. And for me, I'd like to, from time to time, of whenever we can, of a schedule of some of the outside parent type meetings and things within the schools that are happening, to at least have that out there as options for us to be able to at least see when ice cream social things are happening, when particularly the first part of the school year when everyone's coming back. There are a lot of different events of the parent nights that if you put that out there for us to at least see, so if we can different board members have opportunities to pop in at some of those events, I think it would be good to kind of know when some of those are happening. I think you in your Noonan notes on Friday try to kind of lay out some of the things that are happening within.
That's more of my schedule,
Yeah,
though.
but it does help sometimes with your schedule of seeing some of those different things that are happening. It is helpful for me sometimes of seeing that of like, oh, this is happening on Thursday night. Let me see if I can adjust, because it would be a good something to at least kind of pop in to see what's going on with that event.
Do you all have access to the Google Calendar that was done through Calendar Wars? They call it Calendar Wars, where the folks come together and populate, all the booster meetings, all of the.
The division calendar,
It's on the
the
it's
division.
on the website.
So maybe we
So
could send you a
maybe we can
link to that too,
That
just to
may-
kind of
that would be
see.
helpful just to
Yeah.
kind of see some of that.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Any,
Well,
Mr.
no,
Lawrence?
so, okay. So no meeting next week.
Correct. So our next meeting is, we have a meeting on the 8th, and we have a meeting on the 15th. So the work session's the 15th, and the regular meeting is the 8th.
Okay, in theory, then no third meeting in August either.
Uh,
I guess in theory, but
Well, we have, yeah,
I mean,
have our school.
We've got our retreat.
Retreat.
Right, no, I'm not saying we're not having enough meetings. I'm
Correct.
just trying to schedule.
oh no, I guess you're a good question to ask, because we're probably one of the few districts that don't potentially have a meeting in August and not take pretty much all of August off. So, and I'm not suggesting that because we do have a lot going on with prepping for hopefully next week with a referendum coming up to do some strategy of making sure that we all get on one accord, and as we begin kind of ratcheting up and talking about that. And that's why I say if need be of another meeting in August, we can, if we see that need, definitely do that. But I think planning right now is the 2 meeting, work session meeting, and then the retreat on the 11th, I believe is right there. Yeah.
Okay, and then the meeting tomorrow, you just might want to remind people.
Yeah, I was going to do that. Yeah, so tomorrow night, I encourage folks to come out tomorrow night for the town hall meeting, talking about the GM project. It is next week is when the city council will be voting on whether to authorize the referendum on the GM MEH project. And it is the time that for us, we've heard a lot of public comment already in the community, but this is kind of that formal opportunity to see presentations. We have some new drawings that I saw for the first time last night.
I brought them and put them up here, by the way, so hopefully.
For of new renderings from Perkins Eastman of the community school. That's a little bit more detailed than what we've seen before, so kind of gives a better idea for folks to look at what the potential product would be, but also to ask questions, because as everyone in the community knows and reminds us all the time, this is going to be the biggest project that the city has ever undertaken, and I think we all, both the school board and city council, need to come together and work together, which I think overall generally have done a pretty good job over the last 18 months of doing this. But definitely we want the community feedback on this, because it definitely impacts everybody, that we want to make sure on the city side lay out a little bit more. And I think they are getting there, of the financial piece of it is getting better, because I've probably heard it just as much as anybody else in the community, of being in so many meetings, that piece is getting better and better. But definitely my piece is always make sure that everybody can understand it, because it's using a lot of language, and just make sure that every person who's going to be looking at it kind of has an understanding of it. And tomorrow's the time to let your voice be heard and give your opinion on it before the council votes. Well, you'll have another opportunity at the city council meeting on Monday night, but this is actually a great time to, as everyone is kind of formulating their opinions, to let yours be heard and help in that decision-making process. It's at 7:30
Sure,
at the
Chambers.
in the City Hall chambers. Any final questions, thought before we're adjourning?
I have one quick
Yes, sir.
comment, and that is, it appears that on Thursday, we should be receiving our permit for trailers for Mount Daniel. That has been walked through yet on Monday, and yesterday we got comments back from Fairfax County. Today we submitted another letter suggesting that we're going to reserve 75 parking spaces at Maryland Henderson for the shuttling back and forth. And we anticipate that we should have that trailer permit in hand Thursday, Friday at the latest, which means that those will start rolling up the hill pretty soon. Puts us back on track, and then we have a couple of last hurdles to get through for the full, complete site plan, but I think we're getting really close. So excited about that. And we intend to, once we have that trailer permit in hand, put something out to the broader community that says, here's where we are. We just would like to do it when we have that trailer permit in hand. So we anticipate it, like I say, by Thursday.
Very good. Good news, good news. All right. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.